Welcome to Spiritual Healing Coach, a safe, sacred space for women healing from church trauma, spiritual confusion, and religious shame. If you've been questioning your faith lately, this video is for you. Today we're exploring 5 signs. You're deconstructing your faith, and that's okay. We're going to count down from 5 to 1, starting with a sign that's often quiet and easy to miss. Let's begin with sign number 5. Sign number 5. You no longer feel safe asking questions. There was a time when asking spiritual questions felt like growth. But now, you hesitate, you bite your tongue, you feel that tightening in your chest, that small knot in your stomach. Maybe you've noticed that even gentle doubts, what if this isn't the only way? Or, why would a loving God allow this? Are met with fear, silence, or shame. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. One of the earliest signs of faith deconstruction is this quiet pull toward honesty, and the fear that honesty might cost you your belonging. Many of us were taught that certainty equals faith, that questions are dangerous, that doubt is rebellion. But as Brian McLaren writes in Faith After Doubt, doubt isn't the opposite of faith. It's often where real faith begins. He calls this stage perplexity. It's the moment when tidy answers stop working, and you realize you're no longer safe being fully honest in your community. And when that happens, it's easy to believe you're the problem. You're not. What's happening is that your soul is outgrowing a version of God that was too small to hold your pain, your wonder, your truth. And even though that feels disorienting, even like failure, it's sacred. Sarah Bessey says it's like standing on the shoreline as the tide pulls away everything you thought you needed. You're left barefoot and unsure, but you're not lost. You're being invited deeper. If you've stopped asking questions out loud, or you're whispering them into a journal late at night, wondering if you're still a real Christian, that might be the clearest sign you're deconstructing your faith. And that's okay. There's room in grace for questions. There's room in God for your wondering. And this path may feel lonely, but you are not walking it alone. We're here with you. Sign number 4. You can't hear God in church anymore. You sit in the pew, or maybe you log in online, and the songs feel hollow. The sermons sound like echoes. And the God you used to meet there? You can't seem to find him anymore. If that's happening to you, it doesn't mean your faith is dying. It might mean it's shifting. In Faith After Doubt, Brian McLaren talks about how some churches only know how to speak to earlier stages of faith, the black and white kind. But when you begin to ask deeper questions, when your soul starts reaching for mystery and not just certainty, that language no longer feeds you. You don't hate church. You just feel invisible in it. You want to weep during worship, but not because of shame or surrender, because of how far away God feels in a place that used to be home. And maybe you've tried to fake it. Sing the songs. Say the prayers. Take notes during the sermon. But the connection isn't there. Out of Sorts names this experience with kindness. Sarah Bessey says it's not always about rejection. Sometimes it's about holy hunger. Your spirit refusing to settle for performance when it was made for presence. Your body may even sense it before your mind can explain it. Your chest tightens, your shoulders tense, your heart races. You feel unspoken pressure to believe a version of God you no longer recognize. This doesn't mean you're rebellious. It means you're waking up. When you can no longer hear God in church, it might be because God is meeting you somewhere else. In silence, in grief, in wonder, in art, in nature, in poetry, in pain. That silence in the sanctuary, it might be the Spirit saying, I'm still here, just not in the boxes they gave you. And that's okay. Deconstruction doesn't always begin with belief. Sometimes it begins with disconnection. Not because your faith is weak, but because it's getting honest. Sign number 3. You're afraid you're losing your faith, but you can't go back. You keep hoping this is just a phase. You scroll through your old Bible study notes. You try the devotionals. You listen to the worship playlists that used to break you open. But something inside won't let you pretend anymore. And it scares you. You think, am I falling away? Is this the beginning of the end? Will I ever believe the way I used to? If that's where you are, take a breath. Because this isn't the end, it's the middle. In Faith After Doubt, Brian McLaren writes that this moment, the fear that you're losing faith, is often the moment your faith is finally being reborn, not because it looks the same, but because it's becoming more honest, more integrated, more yours. This is what McLaren calls the wall between complexity and perplexity. It's not just about new ideas, it's about deep grief. Because what you're losing isn't just beliefs, it's your spiritual language, your community, your certainty. That's why it feels like death. Because in some ways, it is, but like all true deaths in the gospel, it's followed by resurrection. You may feel like you're unraveling. But what's really unraveling is the illusion that your faith was ever about performance. And what's being woven in its place is something real, something rooted, a faith that makes space for your doubt, your trauma, your questions, and your body. If you're afraid you're losing your faith, you're not broken. You're becoming. Sarah Bessey calls this the wilderness between who you were and who you are becoming. And in the wilderness, you may not hear much, but you will not be abandoned. The presence of God, not the God you were taught to fear, but the God who is love, is not leaving you. And that voice inside that keeps whispering, you can't go back, that voice is right. But it's not a warning. It's a calling forward. Sign number 2, you're rebuilding a quiet, unspoken faith of your own. It doesn't look like what you were taught. You no longer feel the need to defend your beliefs in a debate. You don't want a statement of faith. You want a sacred rhythm. And even though you haven't told anyone, your prayers sound different now. Quieter, slower, more honest. Maybe you light a candle instead of reciting a verse. Maybe you walk in silence instead of bowing your head. Maybe you stopped praying altogether for a while. And now you're finding your way back, word by fragile word. You don't always know what you believe anymore. And strangely, that feels like peace. Because you're no longer forcing yourself to believe what you should. In Faith After Doubt, Brian McLaren calls this stage harmony, the place where faith and doubt no longer fight each other, but dance. It's the whisper that says, what if belief doesn't have to be loud? What if it can be soft and still holy? This stage is quiet for a reason, because after the unraveling, the shouting, the grief, you need silence, not as absence, but as sanctuary. Lacey Clark Ellman writes that this stage of the journey feels like coming home, but not to the place you came from, to a new landscape, a more spacious God, a more honest you. You may not feel ready to share this new faith. That's okay. Sometimes what's most sacred is still becoming language. You're not hiding, you're healing. And if your faith feels like a tiny ember right now, not a fire, not a flame, not something worth testifying to, that's still real. That's still faith. You don't have to prove your growth to anyone. You don't have to explain your prayers. You don't even have to have words. Sometimes faith sounds like breath. Sometimes it looks like rest. Sometimes it moves like grief and glows like poetry. And if you're holding on to something sacred, even if you can't name it yet, you haven't lost your faith. You're making room for it to return in its own way. Sign number 1. You're not sure what you believe anymore, but you know what you can't unsee. You've seen too much harm done in God's name, too many questions dismissed as rebellion, too many sermons that protected power instead of people. And now, when someone asks what you believe, you pause. Not because you have nothing to say, but because it's not simple anymore. You believe in love. You believe in justice. You believe in mercy and mystery. But the scaffolding of your old theology has collapsed, and even if you wanted to rebuild it exactly the same, you can't, because you've seen behind the curtain, and your soul refuses to go back to sleep. In Faith After Doubt, Brian McLaren says this is the threshold of harmony, the place where belief becomes less about answers and more about integrity. You may not be able to recite a creed, but you can recognize when something violates your spirit. You may not know what you affirm, but you are crystal clear on what you can no longer pretend is holy. This is the paradox of deconstruction. Your faith is unraveling, and your discernment has never been sharper. You're no longer chasing certainty. You're chasing truth. Shameless by Nadia Bowles-Weber speaks to this exact space, when what you were taught is no longer compatible with the God you're discovering in your body, your pain, your humanity. It's disorienting to live in the in-between, to be unsure if you belong anywhere, to carry a faith that doesn't fit in the boxes you were given, but if you're holding questions in one hand and a fierce longing for love and justice in the other, you haven't lost your faith. You've just outgrown its container, and that isn't the end. That's the beginning. So whether you saw yourself in one of these signs, or all five, I want you to know, you are not broken. You are becoming. This path isn't a failure. It's a brave and holy unraveling, and it's more than okay. Thank you for sharing this space with me today. If you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which sign resonated most with your journey? Your story is sacred, and it matters here. For more gentle conversations on healing, faith, and finding your way home, subscribe to Spiritual Healing Coach. And if you'd like to support this work, you can do that anytime at ko-fi.com/Spiritual Healing Coach. Until next time, be kind to yourself. You're not alone, and your faith is still alive, even if it's whispering now.